It is such a pleasure to welcome Kristen Case, who I happily, so this class is, this talk is seated in our first year SASAH class and then is extended into the SASAH Speakers Series. And as we got primed for Kristen's arrival, I was really glad to hear that Kristen went walking down to the river. And it's just nice to remember that we are reading and coming into conversation with Kristen near the shoreline of the Deshkan Zibi, which translates from Anishinaabemowin as Antler River. We started this class by going to the river. Maybe if we're brave, we will culminate the class by returning to the river. Just thinking on where we are gathered is to remember that we're on Sombra Treaty and London Township territory, on lands that have long been stewarded by the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Nunatsiavut, and the Chinantan peoples. And I'll just say that, every time I think about how to infuse meaning into a land acknowledgement, I feel the acute awareness of how meaningless this kind of acknowledgement is if it isn't accompanied by some kind of doing and making. And a doing and making that specifically moves us towards unsettling the destructive colonial relations to which acknowledgements are meant to not just point, but actively grapple with. And in this class, those concrete actions include grappling with work that invites us to reflect on the ways that settler colonialism conditions our relationship to that river and conditions our relationship to the land that we're learning on, and actually, in some cases, can obstruct our capacity to learn from the water and the land. And Kristen's work on Thoreau, which I have been lucky enough to be living alongside for a decade now, has helped me and hopefully has sparked this process for some of you here who have been reading with her alongside one another, but has helped me to navigate the complexity of returning to a writer who, on the one hand, writing in the 19th century and was an active participant in what she acknowledges is a savagist ideology, the savagist ideology of his time, but who was also deeply committed to, at the same time, learning from Indigenous cultures how to reconceive the relationship between the human and more than human world, which is the project of this class as well. So before we begin to grapple with this kind of complexity together with Kristen, together with Thoreau, I thought that I would just introduce Kristen by way of recalling what it felt like to hear Kristen give a talk 10 years ago. And maybe you will have the same heart-opening experience that I had. But I was, some of you here have been to the weird thing that is an academic conference. Some of you may have that experience in your future. But even the best of them, and this was a pretty good one, consists of a lot of people just standing up and monologuing at you. And my own tolerance for this, I sort of come to saturation after maybe, a morning and afternoon of this. And Kristen's talk, I think, was on the second day. So I was at capacity when Kristen stepped up to the lectern, and the talk was about participation. It was about both the poetics of participation and the pedagogy of participation. And she did a thing that Thoreau does for us, which is she took a word that we think we know, a very common sense word, and a word that maybe in its overuse, like in the case of participation, is overuse in classrooms. We do damage to the word in that it no longer feels alive to us. It no longer animates us is no longer a call to action. And for me, that word became a call. It was a call to take part, to do my part. And it was this, she took a room of sort of people who had sat back in their chairs to be passive recipients, and it felt like we were all taking part in the project of building something together. In this case, the pursuit of a collective, communal, always in progress version of truth. And that is the project that I carry forward from that reanimating of the word participation forward with me, and is a feeling I have a lot in SASAH classrooms, happily, is the feeling I have every time I read an essay or a book or have a conversation with Kristen. And luckily, Kristen has a lot of books to give me abundant opportunities to have that feeling of taking part in this collective project of pursuing truth. Kristen is the author of 6 scholarly books and 3 books of poetry, the most recent of which I left on my desk, but is called Daphne. It came out earlier this year.
I was only the editor of some of them. That makes it sound like too many books.
Yeah, being an editor of a book is its own unworthy thing.
This is true, as we know.
But the book that we'll be gathering around today came out in the U.S. November 12th. In Canada, it still isn't officially released, but we had a lovely book launch at a bookstore called Little Wren in London last night. And I'll just say that it feels really lucky to be able to invite others, to invite all of you to join me in the participatory process of reading Kristen's writing and being in conversation with her. And so thank you for all being here and being a part of that conversation, and also giving me an excuse or giving me a reason to convince Kristen that her book tour should extend to Canada and that her book launch should be seated in this class. So yeah, I am so honored to have you here. And so I feel so lucky to be thinking along Thoreau with you.
Okay. Well, it is a total delight to be, I'm going to try to, this is like a high bar that Kate has set for me here today, but I'm going to try to do my best. It's such a pleasure to be here at Western, and thank you to SASAH. SASAH, is this what we say? SASAH. And of course, especially to Kate, who's has just been the most extraordinary host for my time here, and friend and collaborator. It's really been a pleasure to be in conversation with you and doing life with you these past few days. And it glorious to be here at Western. It is so, you're in such a beautiful place. And I really I have loved my time here. So, and everyone is so kind and I sent a text home that was like showing the snow. And I was like, there's a foot of snow and everyone is incredibly friendly. Canada is exactly as advertised. So it's been a delight. So I wanted to, today I want to talk to you a little bit about Thoreau's Kalendar, which I know you have seen maybe little bits of. Let's see if I can get this to go. Do I point it at this or at that?
Computer, but you might
Okay. Or maybe it's just not on or something.
No, she lives on her own.
Okay. Oh, there it goes. It's just pointed down there. Okay, great. There's always a trick. Okay, so we're going to try that. There we go. So this is what Thoreau's Kalendar looks like, just so that you can have kind of an image in your mind for the next little bit. And these manuscripts, there are 19 of these sheets. They're kind of large, oversized charts. And those 19 sheets or leaves, as manuscript people like to say, which is quite wonderful, that Thoreau compiled at the end of his life have been kind of my companions for the last couple of decades. And so I have two things that I would like to do today. One is to sort of tell you what they are and what I think he was up to in making these charts. And then the second thing is to kind of make a little argument about why I think they matter and like could matter to us now. And so you can let me know if I persuade you or not. But I want to start not with the calendar, but with Walden, because I am guessing that for many in the room, and I know at least some of you in the room, Walden is more familiar. So people have read some parts of Walden. Can we just quickly, I would love to know what you think. Any thoughts about takeaways from Walden, like impressions that you had coming away from Walden, or things that stuck with you? Any haters? Any like absolute haters? You can say I was a hater. I was a hater. My first 2 times through, I was a hater. So you're in. It's safe to say. Yeah, like a little.
Well, I'm not a hater, but I was just gonna say that, like, when I first read it, I was like, wow, this is dense with like information, and I was very overwhelmed by it at the beginning. But I came to respect it as I went through.
Came to respect it. That's so. That's so endearingly. Like I'm just really trying to. But that's good for you for holding open, like letting yourself come to admire it in some ways, even if. Somewhat with some difficulty. Any other reactions, responses, or things that stuck out? Yeah.
I thought it would be really larger, romantic, and full of nature worship.
Yeah.
It was so pragmatic.
Yes.
Full of measurements,
Yes.
plants, and,
Yes.
and things.
Yes.
That was a surprise.
It's so, the half penny, right? To the half penny, the price of nails.
Yeah, everything cost.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a surprise for many people, and especially the density of economy is that first chapter is really, I sometimes think of economy as like a little test, like it's smooth sailing. I think it's sort of smooth sailing if you can get through economy, that it gets easier from there, but it's a heady chapter. It's also where he's the most sort of abrasive, so he's like, he's really like
likable.
I think he's a little bit of a curmudgeon, and I think he's also like playing a little bit of a curmudgeonly character in that opening. Anybody else? Other thoughts or things that stuck with you, or that you found yourself thinking about in reading Walden? Curious. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'm sure you know, like, quite a bit about our course, but we're doing like these ELP projects.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So like part of mine is that I go and I walk in nature like multiple times a week, and it was kind of inspired by like Walden and how he was like always in nature, like very far away.
Yes.
And it kind of gave him a sense of peace as well to just be away from people, and that's kind of what I was seeking, because there's like I'm always around people with dorm life and stuff like that. So, but every time I go walking, and I always think about how he measures like the water levels. And
incredible.
How he's talking, oh, he dropped like this much. And I'm thinking like, how can you know that? But then I'll walk past the water, and there's like this one path where you can't actually walk, like if the water gets higher, or else you have to like jump and just hope. And every time I walk past that spot, I'm like, this is why it's important.
Yes. Oh, that's so amazing. I'm actually going to talk about the river levels. That's really great. But he had amazing mechanisms for. There's a person who. His name is Robert Thorson, but hilariously he goes by Thor. So everyone he's a professor at University of Connecticut and a real character. And he wrote a book called The Boatman, which is the thesis is that we associate Thoreau with Walden Pond, of course, but that actually the river and boating on the river was like a huge part of his life as well. And he is a river a river scientist. I don't even know what but he studies like river dynamics and the ecology of rivers as well. And so when I was working on the calendar, I kept having to say, like, what do you think? Was it like a string or what? Like, what was and he and I together kind of worked out what we think that he did to measure the river, which is essentially, I think like a stick and a string with markings. Yeah.
It's pretty detailed.
And a notched tree. He also had a kind of, there was a tree by the river, this will come back later, with a notch in it that was his baseline. And then he measured from that to the surface of the water. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all for sharing. It's always great to hear. I do think the Thoreau of economy especially is a provocateur. He is trying to provoke in some ways. And so it's always fun to hear people's reactions to that provocation. I think in some ways Walden itself as a whole is a provocation. And so that comes through. Let's see. Come on. Okay, there we go. So this is a passage that you might remember from Walden, and I wanted to sort of start out by letting this passage kind of linger through the rest of our conversation. I think he articulates here a really interesting idea about time that I want to come back to. I did not read books the first summer. I hoed beans. Nay, I often did better than this. There were times when I could not afford to sacrifice the bloom of the present moment to any work, whether of the head or the hands. I love a broad margin to my life. Sometimes in a summer morning, having taken my accustomed bath, I sat in my sunny doorway from sunrise till noon, wrapped in a reverie amidst the pines and hickories and sumacs, in undisturbed solitude and stillness, while the birds sang around or flitted noiselessly through the house, until by the sun falling away at my west window or the noise of some traveler's wagon on a distant highway, I was reminded of the lapse of time. I grew in those seasons like corn in the night, and they were far better than any work of the hands would have been. They were not time subtracted from my life, but so much over and above my usual allowance. So this, I just kind of want us to bear this. I love this idea of kind of abundant time, of a sort of surplus time that isn't thinking of time as something that could be additive rather than just constantly running down is a really interesting idea. And I think it illustrates the main thing I want to talk about today, which is how imaginative Thoreau is about our experience of time and how that imagination actually can shift the way we experience time. So in Walden, as actually in each of his published works, Thoreau treats time not as an inevitable or immovable constraint, but as one variable among many that he can shape, arrange, and reimagine. He was a surveyor, which you might know. He surveyed properties, and so walked the borders and drew maps of the properties and copied maps. As a surveyor, Thoreau thought often about the boundaries between things, the borders, the thin lines dividing inside from outside, public from private, the self from the world, the past from the present, one season from another. One of the many ways to read Walden is as a kind of dispatch from the boundary between our conventional social world and the wider, freer spaces just outside of it. As he well understood, to live on a boundary allows for communication in both directions. From the edge of town, he brought his neighbors news of what lay just beyond it. When I imagine Thoreau, I often think of him sitting in that doorway that he describes, on the porous margin between the ecos, or household, of his own being and the economy of 19th century Concord, which was itself on a threshold between human and more than human neighborhoods. When we think of Thoreau's intervention in our collective life, so what he did that is still with us, we often think in these spatial terms of the place that he made at Walden Pond, and in the way that in making it, he brought place itself to our collective attention. But I think that Thoreau's legacy could also be understood as an intervention in his own and our experience of time. At Walden Pond, he designed a life, an economy that was outside the constraints of clock time, a way of being in which, as he puts it, both place and time were changed. Connecting his own daily habits to the rhythms of the natural world, he discovered that time was plastic, that he could experience the distant past alongside the present, and could live in the cyclical unfolding of perennial phenomena. This awareness of time's plasticity informs each of his experiments in writing in a different way. In A Week on the Concord and Merrimack River, the days of the week become expansive repositories for discrete ideas. In the journal, he animates the previous day's observations with the present tense. In other words, he's often writing each day about the day before, as if in the present tense. So there's this kind of interesting time-related fiction in the journal where he's reporting on in the past, but as if it's the present. In Walden, you might remember he compresses 2 years into one, bending the arrow of time into a circle. The calendar, with its decades worth of seasonal observations, collapsed into a single pane. So that's what we were just looking at. Represents the last and most elaborate of these many experiments in temporal arrangement, an attempt to access what we might think of as the fullness of time. Does anyone know that phrase, the fullness of time? So it comes from the Bible. Oh, thank you. It comes from the Bible, and it refers to the timing of Christ's arrival. And there are echoes of that same phrase, the fullness of time, in Shakespeare and lots of other writers as well. In Shakespeare, he writes, the Shakespearean sort of version of it often has to do with the ripeness of time. In King Lear, for example, and As You Like It, he uses this metaphor of the ripeness of time. Shakespeare is, the ripeness is a kind of gloss here on the Greek word kairos, which is what's in the expressing that idea in the Bible, in the fullness of time, is kairos, which means something like it's connected to seasonality, but also signals a special kind of divine time. So I'm just really interested in this idea. Actually, was after I wrote the book that I became interested in Kairos and Chronos. Chronos is essentially ordinary time, clock time. So the kind of linear time of first I have this class and then I have the next class and then I have a 5-minute break. That's Chronos. Kairos is a kind of expanded time that you can slip into when there's something alters in your temporal sense. So I'm interested in thinking about Thoreau's cabin on a boundary of Chronos and Kairos. So living in this crossing of two different kinds of time. Okay, so what is the calendar? To talk about that, I first need to just tell you a little bit about what happens after Thoreau leaves Walden. So he leaves Walden in 1847. He was there for 2 years. He's writing the book even after he leaves. He actually keeps writing the book for like 9 years. So the whole Walden experience is much longer than the time that he is at Walden Pond. So that's its own kind of interesting time thing. He leaves Walden in 1847. He's 29. Walden is published in 1854. And in the period after Walden is really when he develops this intense walking and journaling practice, where he's walking for like many hours each day, and then the next day writing about those walks in his journal. And this is what they looked like. And there are many, 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 many of them. And they're compiled now into, depending on the edition, 10 or 13 volumes. But the notebooks looked like that, the original manuscripts. So he's writing these long journal entries each day. And he does that in an intense way from about 1850, so pretty soon after he leaves Walden in 47, to almost the very end of his life, pretty much. When he gets too sick to be able to go out walking is when he finally kind of lets that habit go. So an interesting thing happens in 1860. So this is toward the end of his life. He dies in 1862. He starts making that's when he starts making these charts. So he'd been keeping the journal for 10 years, and he starts making these kind of elaborate indexes to his own journal. And I want to just show you briefly how to read them. So the column on the left are seasonal categories that he has tracked in his journal. So essentially, the charts show places if you follow a category across, which I'll show you, the charts show places in his journal where he talked about that thing. And they're organized by month. So this is the one you're looking at is for April. At the very top, it's very hard to read, but it says general phenomena for April. So these exist for 6 different months. He made 2 for April 1860, 5 for May of 1860. These are kind of sheets or leaves. Oh, that's wrong. 2 for May, 5 for June, 2 for October, 4 for November, and 4 for December. But the fall ones, October, November, and December, were for 1861. So that means he took a break on this project in the middle. And I'll talk a little bit about some thoughts about the timing of the 2 parts of it. Okay, so let me just show you quickly how they work. So here's a zoomed in little row. Can anyone see what that category says? The largest writing there? Anyone read it? Yeah. Yes, river is exactly right. What do you think the second word is? Good guess. Yeah. Lowest, exactly. River lowest. And now somebody read under 53. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's pretty tight in there. So this is the lowest point that the river gets in the month of April across all of these years. Does that kind of roughly make sense? And so this is just to show you both kind of how he did it, and then also how I was able to transcribe the chart. So I guess I should have said this. What the book is mostly transcriptions of these charts, which hadn't been transcribed before. So, oh, how nice. So in trying to decipher what this said, I only really had one good clue, which is this little 2 here. So it's general phenomena for November. So we know we're in the month of November. This 2 says it's November 2nd. And this column says it's 1857. So luckily for me, Thoreau's journal is entirely is available, searchable on Google Books. Thank you, Google Books. So I can immediately go to that journal entry, put in this date, read the entry, and then make some guesses about what I'm seeing. So I probably got falling pretty quickly, and then, some other things. So going back to here's the actual journal entry. The water is falling fast, and I push direct over the meadow this evening, probably for the last time this fall, scraping the cranberry vines and the hummocks from time to time with my flat-bottomed boat. And then here's what he copies into the calendar. Falling fast, push direct over Lee's Med, prob for the last time, scraping the ground. So it's kind of condensed little version of that information from the entry. So that's sort of how it works. And then I just wanted to show you some example categories, because this is really what got me hooked on the calendar, was how interesting and strange sometimes his categories were. Anyone want to take a stab at reading that one? You could also just like any word. Yeah. Egg, great guess. His great guess. So we've got some, like, what do you call those? Descenders, right? We've got some descenders, but they're not G's. They're actually F's. Does that help? Off. So that's off. What do you think this says? First. What is it? Close. You got the L right. Leave. First, leave off. This is really hard. It's great coat. So essentially your winter coat. So this is a real like cold weather, April in a cold weather place entry. Like the first day you leave in April, you like, oh my God, I don't have to put my winter coat on. And then of course, you know what happens after that. Oh wait. Oh yeah, there it is. Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
The last word again.
The last word is again.
Great coat again.
Wear great coat again. Yeah, exactly. Which is like, I remember finding that and being like, oh my God, that's exactly what April is like. You put your winter coat away and you think you're done, and then it snows and you need your winter coat again. This is another one I really like. That's first AM that I sit with open window. So the first morning that you have the window open in the spring. So in the spring of 1860, when Thoreau is making these charts, go back. Oh, I went too fast. He's incredibly sort of intellectually electrified. And part of the reason for that is that he has had the abolitionist John Brown, who he met in person, who is a kind of electrifying presence, and whose impact on Thoreau was he just impressed Thoreau so thoroughly with his commitment to the idea that slavery was the moral responsibility of every person. So he was executed. John Brown was executed. Thoreau writes a plea for Captain John Brown in the fall of, I think right before his execution, in the fall of 1859. And then in January of 1860, he reads On the Origin of Species by Darwin. And in both, and that explodes his mind too. So he's having these encounters that are really pushing his thinking forward. And one of them is about the kind of interconnectedness of the political reality of in the United States, and the sense that everyone bore responsibility for that reality and was connected. So even though he lived in the North and was an abolitionist, he could not escape moral responsibility for the existence of slavery. At the same time, in a very different way, Darwin was also saying everything is connected, right? All species have this kind of interconnection through environment. That means that we are not just in separate categories that stay in those categories, but in fact like a web. And so it's a similar idea. And so it's about that time that he does this, which I think is really interesting because it's almost as if he is translating that idea about interconnection to thinking about time. So what you have here is the month of April over a decade, but instead of just one day after another, as in his journal, suddenly you're looking at it all at once and you're able to see the connections between each April and each other April. Okay. And then, so just to go back to this slide, remember there was that gap between when he started the project and then when he finished the project or did the second half of the project, a little like a year and a half later. And in the second half, in October of 1861, at this time, he's actually quite ill and quite close to death. So he dies in the summer of 62, but already by the fall of 1861, he's essentially bedridden. So he can't go on the long walks anymore. By November, he's really doesn't go outside much at all anymore. By December, he can't climb the stairs anymore. And he has his sister has his bed moved to the living room where he's able to look out at the river. But friends are coming to visit him every day. And he is finishing up works for publication that had been unfinished. So he pretty clearly knows that he's dying. And so it's a strange and interesting thing that he picks up he decides to kind of re-enter this project at that time. And so one of my big questions was why? Why at this time is that when he is dying, is this project calling to him? Okay, let's see. So go forward again. This is the last journal entry. It's November 3rd, 1861. This is the end of the journal. At this time, he's not able to take the walks anymore, and the journal just kind of peters out. And it's wonderful and amazing that Thoreau's very final journal entry ends on the words self-registering, which is, of course, what a journal does. He's talking about the marks made by wind, but it's just an amazing fact that that's the last note of the journal. So I want to just show you now a couple of categories from November because we are in November. This is one of the November charts, and we'll just quickly look at it. This is when let's see if I can. So one of the things that's really interesting in thinking about the timing of the calendar is that this category here of 1861 exists at all because remember we talked about how all of these entries here are taken from the journal, but here the journal doesn't exist anymore. He's not keeping the journal anymore. So in other words, he has moved now to writing directly on to the charts. And he's also not going on the long walks anymore. So where is he getting the information to put into the charts? Any guesses? Yes, back there. Yes, his friends are walking. Did you guys talk about this already? Yeah, okay. Yes, you know. Yeah, so his friends come and bring him seasonal information, which I just find incredibly moving, and particularly this measuring of the river. So that's what we're looking at up here, this tiny, tiny type. And that tree notch that we were talking about before with the river was on a tree in the backyard of his best friend, Ellery Channing. And so it seems almost impossible to me that it happened any other way, right? Like Channing just went in the backyard, went to the tree notch, had the measuring stick, did the measuring, and brought those numbers, I think. I have to always say that because I don't actually know, but I think so. And you can see what that looks like here, what those actual measurements were. And it just would not have been possible for him to take those measurements on his own. And then one closing entry that I love that I wanted to share, that I think it kind of illustrates some of my favorite things about the calendar and the way that it operates, is this entry "Rejoice in" for November, and you have the full journal entry here with all of this kind of beautiful detail about the November landscape, and ending with this beautiful line, "Now, as in spring, we rejoice in sheltered and sunny places." And then just this very small note here, "Rejoice in," that makes it into 1857 on the calendar. Okay, so I'm going to just conclude in a moment, and then we will have time to talk. And so I want to just say a couple of things about, now I'm getting to the second part, which is why any of this matters or should matter to us. So I want to return to this opening passage, and that particularly the idea of that abundant time that we talked about. In its articulation of an alternative to the forward march of linear time, the calendar can be understood as part of Thoreau's critique of the restless, nervous, bustling, trivial 19th century. That's what he called it. And its organization of human life. Immediately linked to the rise of industrialization and capitalism, standard time or clock time began in the early modern period to gain ascendancy over the cyclical, seasonal temporal structures, which had governed life in agricultural societies of Europe in the medieval period. Thoreau made the link between the bustling speed of life in the second half of the 19th century and the rise of industrial capitalism and its ever-increasing regimentation of labor. Where is this division of labor to end, he asks in Walden, and what object does it finally serve? No doubt another may think for me, but it is not therefore desirable that he should do so to the exclusion of my thinking for myself. We might pause on that quotation at this particular moment in history. Here, Thoreau perceives the connection between the division of labor and its alienation from intellectual thought and natural processes that would become increasingly common features of working life in the 20th and 21st centuries. As Jenny Odell details in Saving Time, her excellent book about temporality, the rise of the mechanized assembly line style workplace was accompanied by what was called de-skilling. This is, I think, a very chilling reality that everyone should know about, is that when assembly lines were instituted, one of the things that they did was deliberately engage in this process called de-skilling, which was getting workers to have less knowledge of what they were participating in making, because it was more efficient if you only knew your part. So be on the lookout for de-skilling. If someone is telling you don't need to know about that, you may be being de-skilled. It's I think a really important concept for this moment. Anticipating the way that clock time would be harnessed to control human labor and thought, Thoreau sought an alternative to living that is also an alternative to his culture's temporal conventions. The key to time's power over us is that it also operates inside of us. So we have in our bodies ways of measuring time, and they connect to exterior ways of measuring time. Chronoception, our sense of the passage of time, is both deeply internal, keyed to the operations of entropy in the cells of the body, and thoroughly collective, connected to diurnal and planetary cycles, social calendars, and the shared rhythms of cultural life. And despite our increasing alienation from this interconnected seasonal time, it is still visible in our collective habits. These days, in which more and more of us are experiencing what researchers call time famine, it's a real thing that researchers talk about, the sense of perpetual lack of time, it is all striking, almost jarring to read this description of time in Walden, of abundant or blooming time, time that is somehow more than itself, over and above our usual allowance. As Shakespeare understood, kairos is connected not only to the divine, but also to the earthly. The kind of time that is measured by ripeness is a calendar of overlapping and interrelated patterns of growth and decay, death and rebirth, a fullness in which the individual is understood as part of a web of connection, a member of a species, a participant in an ecosystem. In this way, it seems fitting that in Thoreau's own turn to kairos, he was turning or returning not only to the seasonal patterns of rain and snowfall, the depth and shallowness of the river, but also in new ways to the human beings around him, from a posture of self-reliance to one of dependence on others. His sister, who would become his amanuensis, his writing hand, and his friend Channing, who would become his out-of-doors eyes. If in Chronos we are locked in, entrapped in the unceasing demands of the present, and alone measuring out our hours and weeks and years against our individual and inevitable ends, in Kairos we remember that this solitude is an illusion and that we, like everything that grows, live in a shared world, layered with human and more than human meaning that will continue after we are gone. And then just to close, I want to concede that it can feel trivial or tone deaf in these days of climate crisis and genocide and threats to democracy to argue for, as explicitly I want to do, for something as luxurious and sort of superfluous feeling as reading long and difficult books, spending many, many hours with manuscripts, engaging generally in the kind of inquiry that we are doing here today together. But in its original conception, kairos also means the proper time for action. It's the moment that an arrow finds its target. It is the fullness of time that teaches us how to properly gauge our particular place within the vast cosmos in which we find ourselves and to act from that place to make our lives count. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions. Yeah.
I was wondering, so we have a little microphone for you.
Oh. Oh my goodness, this is fancy. Yeah, so I wrote it down so I would remember. But is this fine? Can I just talk like this? Okay. What strategies do you use to commit to the reading and analysis of Thoreau's expansive works? Because I feel like it was really dense and there's a lot to go over, and I just want to know, like, for my own purposes of like studying and like intake of knowledge in the future, like what do you find most helpful in like really getting into that critical stuff?
So the biggest thing I would say is you don't have to be a completist. So the most important information I can tell you right now is that I have not read everything by Henry David Thoreau. So it's huge. It's vast. Pick a place. Like, keep your horizon small. So these charts that I looked at, there are 19 of them, but there are hundreds of other ones that I did not look at. And so, what it ended up doing, having this narrow focus, is like I ended up reading through quite a lot of the journal by reading the charts. So I just followed. But what I didn't do is feel like, well, page 1, I gotta get through all 25, So you don't be modest in your expectations of yourself. Don't feel like to say anything, you need to know everything. I think that's a weird, academic life can make us feel that feel secure in saying a single thing. You have to know all the things, and you have to be 100% sure. And that turns out the reason that's messed up is that turns out to be impossible. So it's a trap. And so making your piece early with like, it's going to be partial and it's going to be not the whole thing. And it's a conversation, not a thing where you have the last word, is the sooner you can make your peace with that idea, the more you'll feel free the focus will feel not like a chore, but more like fun because it's not pressured in the same way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just really inspired by like everything that you've said. I'm kind of still working for it, but working kind of through it. But I think like I was really I'm gonna kind of piggyback off of Zoe, who just spoke. But I really like this idea of like not necessarily going through everything and not being a completist. I was wondering like if there's even a connection with like this idea of like like not necessarily having time. Like before you came in, we were talking about like the cyclicality of time. So like almost this idea of, you know, like going through his calendar, not necessarily in a chronological order, and having this kind of like way to look at it from like left to right or something, but like looking at what inspires this the most and almost like, do you think there's something there?
Oh, completely. I think there's something there. I mean, someone told me recently, like, well, I'm reading your book, but I'm not really reading it. I'm like flipping through and finding categories that I'm interested in and then just reading about that one. And I was like, it could not be a better way from my perspective, because he was reordering his own thinking. And I think that if nothing else, like that fully gives us permission to do that. And which isn't to say that like, you know, history doesn't matter and like thoroughness doesn't matter. But I think your interest and your engagement and your sense of wonder also matter. And so I think like really following that is, the work will be better if it is infused with, and it will be more real and it will be more yours, if it's infused with that sense of your own interest. And so, yeah, do that. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask what first drew you, like what was your first inspiration to Thoreau and his calendar, and like what was your most surprising discovery about him in your research?
Yes, I will. Did you already talk about debauchery?
No.
Okay, so we'll talk about debauchery. So very early on, I became interested in the charts because, in part, I think because I had, for the first time in my life, I was trying to grow things. I had a little garden, and I was keeping notes myself about like when, you know, if I plant this, it will bloom in July, and I also want something that will bloom in August, and so it always looks nice. So I was like keeping those kinds of notes, and I just became really interested that he was also keeping these seasonal notes. But then in terms of the strangest discovery, very early on, I was trying to make sense of a category, and it said something, look of streets in Mourne. And I was like, what could that word be? It seems like it starts with a D. Could it be deserted or desolate or something? And it turned out to be debauched, which means kind of like, I don't even know how to say it, but like dirty in a sexual way. And I was like, that is weird. Like, why is he talking about the streets in this way? And it made me realize that whatever he was doing in the calendar was not a kind of just a scientific project. Like he had his own very particular way of organizing things and seeing things. And then I got really interested in that. Yes. The gentleman who gave me the delicious gummy worm.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Okay, so I don't really have a particular question here, but I have a bunch of thoughts on like what you said about and what Thoreau says about time.
Yeah.
I just want to get your like thoughts on what I say. Is that okay?
Great. Of course.
Okay. So I think so you talked about de-skilling, right?
Yeah.
I think there's two different aspects where this applies, where first, in our experience of time in modern, or like there's a sort of like the experience of time has been turned into like a sort of atomized unit where it's like there's a separation between the experience of things and time, in the time in which you experience them. So the way in which I think about time, and I think like time occurs, is like in accordance with what you do in that time. But it seems to me that there's like when we turn them into like this unit, we separate the experience and the time in which this time took place, which is a bit of a confusing sentence. And I think this applies to de-skilling, where it's like this is the same process that occurs where you become separated from the experience of time. And it's also about like what the project of your life is, because when society is so fast-paced, you just have to like go through time like an assembly line. You just do this particular thing at this moment with a consideration for how it fits into a broader life project, or a life that you want to build, or a world that you want to build. And so it's a sort of way of like it's sort of the like same concept, I think. It's like de-scaling, like alienation from your life and how you experience it as a whole into these like individual units of like, I do this at this time, I do this at this time, not fitting it into like a broader story of like, how do I want to live as a fundamental person?
Yes.
And I think this also fits into like why he talks about the calendar at the end of his life, where this entire project of living in the forest has been a process of reordering time into its, I guess, natural state of like in accordance with experience. I think there's a way in which that our modern society makes it so that time is I think time is something when time is when something occurs, but like modern society has reversed the order, where it's like you do stuff in accordance with your schedule, or like a certain allotted time that you have for this activity, where time determines what you do instead of time being the thing in which you do something.
That's great.
I'm sorry, this has been really like kind of rambly, but like, what are your thoughts?
I absolutely agree. Totally agree. And I mean, if you think about it, it's like the original units were about how much light there was to, like, the workday was when there was light available to. So the idea that that time followed the work rather than work being dictated by the time. I don't know if I said that quite right, but yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that this is in the same way that environment was becoming fragmented and damaged by industrialization in the 19th century. I think Thoreau understood the way that kind of inhabiting of time was also being fragmented and destroyed by industrialization in that way.
Yeah, there's like a sense where we're like chasing time.
Yes. Yes. Amazing. Over here, yes.
So I'm going to try not to sound like all over the place, but everything you said about time, about like Kairos and Chronos, it really struck me. And I know we're all students, so I think particularly the concept of time is really relevant to us because we experience it every day, that feeling of like there being so much that we could do or so much that could be done versus not having enough time to facilitate that. But another way that I've kind of had to confront this is actually through my everyday life project. And I'll try not to take too long, but I'm not sure how familiar you might be with the Doomsday Clock by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, but that's how I guess I try to be like Thoreau in a way, and I try to model my everyday life project after that. And so at first what I did was come up with like a 12-hour clock, and I would just, for every hour a 12-hour clock, 24-hour clock, I'm so sorry, 24-hour clock, and for every hour I would research about climate change, and my end goal was that I would come up with my own theory for when the world would end, when it would be too late for us to do anything about climate change. But the issue that I kept running into was that like you discussed a bit, that linearity of time, feeling like there's this arrow that's just taking us towards this climate disaster. It made me feel so absolutely, and I kind of knew this going in, that this would be kind of an emotionally distressing project, but I really could not like express the level of hopelessness that it made me feel, because I felt like for the amount of time I had allotted, I didn't have the agency or ability to really do anything from that. And I wanted to ask you, like, how do you utilize Thoreau's like works in helping you cope with feeling helpless and feeling like in front of time you're so insignificant?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I don't. What time do we? I don't want to hold people hostage.
If, so our class.
Yes.
We can hold them hostage.
Yeah.
Until 4:30.
Okay.
The event was billed.
Okay.
4, and so if people want to.
Yeah, I just want to say I have like a it's like my deepest fear is that people are like stuck in their seats longer and like can't escape. So anyway, please be free. Don't feel trapped. That it's like the question I think that in some ways we're all really wrestling with, and I think for me, Thoreau is exactly the most helpful, because it is this sense of agency that is actually, so the fact that he, really the inspiring thing to me, it's very easy to be like, oh, well, he could do the Walden thing because he like had money and it was the 19th century and land was used. Emerson gave him the land, and, his mom did his laundry and all those things. Oh wait, it's not up anymore. But when he did the calendar, he did not have time. Like he was dying and knew he was dying. So that was the reality. There was no mitigating that material like fact. And it was under those conditions that he still found a way to reconceive and experience a different kind of time. And so to me, what is so hopeful about Thoreau is in the face of real constraint, like real material constraint, he was so imaginative in the agency that he gave himself to reimagine what time was and how he could experience it in the remaining linear time that he had. So the hopefulness is just about imaginative possibility, and when you close down to imaginative possibility and when you remain open. And the great example to me is he never closed down. So it was like, there is no such thing. And I said in the Kate's class the other day, my favorite line from Walden is, there is only one way, we say, but there are as many ways as can be drawn radii from one center. So if you think of a circle and the idea that there's only one way to the circumference, but actually you can go all the way around, right? There's always other ways. And I think he was exceptionally good at always being able to see possibility. And I just think that's a skill that we absolutely vitally need. And particularly in our ways of time is, after all, a thing we made up, right? Like the way we clock time is a thing we made up. And so imaginatively, we made that. So we can imagine it differently. And I think that, which isn't to say that climate change isn't, that the doomsday clock isn't real, but it is to say the construct and what the construct does to us can be different. And I think that, for me, that gives me great hope. Yes.
Perhaps a less existentially challenging question and far more simple. What would you say is your favorite out of all of these calendar entries that you've gone through? And especially now that we are in November ourselves, do you know if there's any entries from any of the Novembers that you've read that you most resonate with?
I love them all. The book kind of features all of my all I really did, I keep forgetting it's not there anymore. All I really did in the book was pick my favorites to write about, but that some are my favorites because they're just really beautiful, like that one about rejoicing in November, I truly love. There's another one about yellow, a particular kind of yellow sunlight that happens in November that I was just not something I was attuned to before I encountered it, and now I always look for it in November. Green in winter is one I really like for December, because similarly, it's like you look for the little bits of, in the very white, bleak landscape, you can still find green. And that for him it was like he was looking for the new life. So that's one. And then one last one that I really love, although it's quite sad, is Walker Eats His Heart for December, and he has a journal entry about this expression. We sometimes use like eat your heart out or eating your own heart, which are a little bit different, but this sense of deep, deep, deep despair of kind of eating your own heart is just helped me to understand. It's actually the same phrase in the Iliad that is used when Achilles' great love Patroclus is killed. So that like the grief of eating your own heart really helped me be attuned to his grief in a different way. I love that one, even though it's very sad. Yeah. Yes.
So for class, we read a little bit from your book, and one thing that stood out to me was how you used the phrase "more than human," and I think you even described your kind of switch in perception. And I was wondering about that switch, and I was wondering how the change in your perception from non-human or other than human to more than human changed your experience with the walks, or how the switch in your understanding kind of changed your perception of time as well.
That's really great and a big question. I love this phrase, and I'm totally blanking now on who I originally stole it from. It's footnoted in the book. Like human more than human, or human all too human. I guess it is. Yeah.
To circulate after Robin Wall Kimmerer's book.
Yeah, it was the before though. I can't anyway. But it is a great concept to me because it is, like long ago when I used to walk in the woods, I would try to be invisible, like stalking almost. Like I would try to make no sound so I could be. And I think that of feeling like the human was necessarily an intrusion onto this other space that was called nature, that was better to be better without me, and a preserve that I had to kind of sneak into. And the concept of the more than human is it's okay. It's not terrible that we're here. We're just not all that's here. There's just more than us. And that I just found that reframe really helpful in thinking about myself as being part of a landscape that is more than me. And it's a concept that is helpful in lots of ways. It's not that we don't have responsibility, or it's not that we don't have we don't have things that we need to do. It's just not only us. It's all of us in a holistic way, and that I think it just helped me feel less alone. I think. Kate, I don't want to. Do you need these last 10 minutes or?
No, but I'll just maybe look and see if are there any more.
Yes, I've been totally neglecting this side of the room.
A really small question.
Thank you for that very much. I just wanted to ask about the rows in the calendar that are crossed out.
Oh, yeah. So with the wavy line.
Yeah.
So usually what that means is that he's decided to move it to another month.
Okay.
So sometimes he starts first snow, for example, and then realizes he has to move it from December to November because it's actually more often in November than December at that time. So that's there's a lot of those. I had to do a lot of learning of his systems. That one took a while because first I knew they were crossed out, but I didn't understand like where that they went somewhere. And then also little abbreviations that are just to himself. So it was fun to kind of reconstruct his process in addition to the text. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Yes, and then yes.
Thank you. That makes me think too, like, was he conscious people were going to read these entries? Like, how forward facing is it versus a personal?
So I think he thought of them as like, at least the spring ones, the first batch. I think he thought of them as scaffolding for what would become a public-facing work, but I don't think he thought anyone else would see the charts. So that's part of why they're so messy. His handwriting did get bad as he got older, but it's less bad in the journal. It's really bad here. And so I think they were for himself. I think they were. But I do think he planned an outward-facing book that would be like a year of conquered phenomena by date. And that's kind of why there are some pieces of the way they're structured that lend some support to that idea. But then the thing that fascinates me is I don't think he could have still been imagining that when he returned to the charts and was so ill. So then it's like, well, why? And so my hypothesis is that just the activity itself was grounding and sort of restoring of his connection to the season.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And back there, did you have a question?
Yes.
Thank you. So my question, I was trying to find a way to like phrase this sort of concisely, but for a work so heavily dedicated to developing an ecology of practices and revisiting previous reflections, how do you move forward in your work and ensure that you do not get stuck in the process of re-reflecting on your reflections? And then I had a little question to piggyback off of that. Do you think it's ever truly possible to exhaust a topic of reflection?
Oh, so interesting. So are you asking this? I mean, what the striking thing about your question is that you could be equally asking it about Thoreau or of me.
So sort of the both of you, actually. Yeah.
I love to be grouped with my friend Henry. How do you make sure that you don't get stuck in the kind of like endless meta reflection? I mean, I think the charts actually pose an interesting version of that because of the way that he was adding until the end. And so there's a way in which like it's the same, but it's also different each time, if that makes sense. And so the idea that you begin to have these structures that you can return to, that in that recursive way you're describing, but it's not like you're just going around in a perfect circle. It's always varied. And we never get to, there's no completeness. And so I don't know, for me, there is always a new element. So when I was writing the chapters, that was in one time. That was in one kind of, if I lose my temporal vocabulary, that was in 1 year. And then those biographical kind of sketches that are at the beginning of each chapter were actually written in a totally different time. And different things were happening in the world. And if they felt important to include in some way, even in just small ways. And that, so that's just, I guess, keeping an openness to what changes feels important in that process. I don't know if that really answered your question or not. Okay, good. Other questions? Okay, well, it was really lovely to be with you all for this hour. You look like you. The last minute question, I want to hear it.
How are you so cool?
Oh, how are you so cool? This has been wonderful, you all. Thank you. I don't have an answer to that question. I'm not cool. Yeah.
Sorry, I just have like one really quick question.
Yeah.
Did you have any friends like Channing that kind of like go on your walks with you?
I have one wonderful friend who I hope will bring me data at my
going
bedside.
walking after
Yeah.
this.
Yes, I have good walking friends. I do, but I am no Thoreau. I don't walk the way he walked, and my life is not as philosophical. I just tried to follow him. So I'm learning. I'm trying to learn, but I do have good friends, including your wonderful professor. So thank you all.
I just wanted to thank Kristen and maybe piggyback on Bridget's wonderful question, which feels like, yeah, just a welcome question to carry forward with us, and say that the book feels like, I just love the way you speak about the book as you following a path from the charts to the journal and back again in a certain time and place, and saying that was one path, that was one time, that was one place. And instead of looping back on that, just extending the possibility to all of us to follow Thoreau's path. And that feels like both a characteristically generous gesture to all of us, but it also allows us to participate, but also avoids the sort of solipsistic return to the self. It's like, come with me, friend. And so thanks for taking us as your friends on a walk with the charts and with Thoreau. Thank you.